Hello, everyone. This is another episode of Gaming at the Round Table. I'm Maverick with JoJo and Crystal, and we're Out Knights Media. We've got our merch finally. Here's a little coffee mug preview for those that watch on YouTube. Gaming at the Round Table. I know it's hard to see and it's probably inverted on a camera, but let's hop in. Today, we're going to talk about something that is affecting all industries and certainly creating chatter in all industries, and that's the TikTok ban, as it's being called, and how it is affecting the gaming industry, how it's affecting us, and what we'd like to see in terms of legal stuff moving forward for the industry, good and bad and otherwise. So let's start with the elephant in the room, which is how did it affect us? That's a good question. Who wants to take this one?
Cried in a corner.
I'll let our editor in chief take that one first.
uh, you know, if I'm being rather honest, I was quite happy with it not being around, but that's just for the doom scroll aspect of it, right? Like, I obviously didn't like something being taken from me, but I spent 17 hours on the app last week.
Last
so,
week. Oh,
last
geez.
week, yeah, in a week. So, I mean, on average, I watch about 2 hours a day worth of TikTok. That's unhealthy. So,
We
not
say that,
having
but
it.
We also
in
work on it to be fair.
Yeah,
So.
we
yeah,
do. We
it's
do
not the
content
same.
creation. I make a ton of videos per day or whatever, and it was hard having it ripped away, though. Like
And
the app itself, but not just TikTok. Right? There was also CapCut. That one hurt deeper than TikTok for me. CapCut is so easy to use. It's straightforward. It to me it was really good for making short content, like quick content. And with it being gone, well, it's back, but when it was gone, I didn't know where to go. I know we ended up looking into DaVinci, which is a really cool editing program. Significantly more you can do on it, much more complex. So, the whole learning curve thing again, where you got to learn a whole new program in order to do stuff.
yeah.
So, the CapCut side of things hurt me more and people that I know more than actual TikTok.
I've actually spoken to, I didn't mean to cut you off, but
No
just
problem.
on that point, I spoke to a couple of people that I know that stream, and it's just been a massive ripple effect. And for lack of lack of better terms, I think it caught a lot of people with their pants down
Yeah.
because they
Yeah.
were kind of focused on one program, not realizing that this other program was very attached to it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I specifically called in the opening of this podcast the TikTok ban on purpose to highlight the fact that that's how the media spoke about it until basically the final hour.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, by the way, you're going to lose all these other things.
Yeah.
So, and that was an impact on the industry. Gaming industry, you can't talk about gaming as an industry and not talk about video editing. Everything from marketing,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, to the community that generates consistent revenue and hype about games, which is the consumers, a la streamers, basically,
Mm-hmm.
and YouTube content creators, just content creators. And many of them are going to use free software because why would you pay for like Adobe or something like that if you can use something free? So a lot of us included, we're using CapCut for video editing, myself included, Crystal, Joe, all of us. And many of the streamers we watch have commented about it. And so it is back, like Crystal said, but temporarily. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's kind of like, well, I guess we better start learning a new technology and
I
not just
think,
us.
yeah, I think it compares to like times are changing, and I mean it happens every generation or every few years. And I'm just saying generation in the broad term because that could be 5 years, 10 years, whatever it may be. To date myself, like I grew up in the generation where ESRB wasn't around at first. Like ratings for video games, for movies had been, I think that's been around since we were small. Like I think that's kind of always been around with like the PG-13, so on and so forth. But there wasn't anything like that inside of music or gaming, especially gaming. Because I think when gaming came out, it was a free for all. I don't think anybody ever really pushed the envelope to where it was like, hey, this is just a bit extreme.
I think Mortal Kombat generated a lot of discussion.
Yeah, that was one of the bigger titles that I was gonna like touch on, where you can't talk about gaming today without like the ripple effect that had. And I think the ripple effect is kind of what we're looking at now, whereas you look at one specific item inside of that, and we'll look at it in a marketing sense, just to keep it off of everything else. If you're looking at it in a marketing platform, it's one of the big three, because you have Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. If you're going to say like a big three, then you could follow that up with other platforms. But I would say those are the big three of today. So to have one of the big three just kind of kicked out, your little table is kind of going like,
Yeah.
and a lot of people are like trying to figure out like, okay, what do we do? What do we do? And again, it was in a short period of time. And knock on wood, it didn't last too long. But I mean, look at how bad people were panicking. I mean, I know people personally that it had them on the edge. Like, it was bad.
Yeah, I think for anyone listening that doesn't really feel the same way, which is fine. We all have our own feelings and thoughts. It is undeniable that many people had made a living on the platform of TikTok, and even more people who make content creation as a living were using other subsidiary programs like CapCut. So gaming industry at large obviously affected, because billion-dollar industry and tournaments and all this other stuff, right? Like all these famous streamers that generate lots of not only revenue for themselves, but really interest in the gaming markets. A lot of them had to adapt, like adapt or die, sucker. And that is the way it is. Other things that were affected, I think Marvel had a card game that got pulled because it was owned by Tencent. Tencent, for anyone that's unaware, is the largest gaming industry company out of China, and probably one of the largest, if not the largest, across the globe. Definitely a huge player. And they have their fingers in a lot of pots. So don't think that this is just exclusive to TikTok and doom scrolling teenagers, right? This affects way more in our industry. We're here talking about gaming, right? So I'm going to list some games that are majorly owned or owned in part by Tencent, just to talk about like possible rippling down the road in gaming. So Riot Games, which many people will know from League of Legends, 100% ownership. So it's not majority. That is theirs and theirs alone. So if Tencent,
that means it affects Arcane too, just to kind of point out how it can cross again the ripple. It crosses outside of our gaming bubble.
Yes, that's the point we're trying to make at this instant, is that it's short-sighted to just see it as a TikTok ban. And we already talked about editing. We already talked about podcasters and streamers. Now we're talking about other games. And to your point, Joe, Netflix hosts currently, right now. You can go onto Netflix and watch TV series about Riot Games. There's got to be some legal interplay there. League of Legends, 100%. I'm taking this from an article from PC Gamer, just to give them credit. Epic Games, tiny company you guys might have heard of. They have their own game. What do they call that? Like Steam, PlayStation Store, Xbox Store, and then there's
the
Epic Games Store.
Yeah.
I don't know the generic term for that, but it's huge. It's a huge percentage of the gaming market. That is owned 40% by Tencent. And this article might be like a year old, so I don't know how much more they own now. 40% of Epic Games. Epic Games is also responsible, other than Fortnite, right? The game engine. So who knows if there's a ripple effect there? Unsure. I'll just list a couple more because these are all kind of famous. Larian Studios, 30% of Larry. Yeah, Baldur's Gate 3 won Game of the Year in the last couple of years. Still talked about to this day in gaming news, constantly. Baldur's Gate 3, Larian Studios, 30% of them owned by Tencent. From Software, which I'm less familiar with and they own much less of, 16%. It's, I believe, I want to say they're the owner and maker of like Dark Souls, but I'm not as positive, so I'll move on. And I'll list one more. There's a couple of big ones actually, so I'll list a couple very rapidly. Grinding Gear Games, Path of Exile, 80%, Activision, 5%, which blew me away. I didn't think they owned any of it. So that's Blizzard, right? And Ubisoft, 11%, maybe. And they've got a huge list after that. But those are the, whoa, Discord.
He keeps just scrolling.
I didn't realize Discord was on there. And it's undisclosed, but they are a major investor. Now, Discord is another platform that so many people use, especially in the gaming industry, that's a free utility. Could you imagine?
Everybody just heard the deep breath we all just took.
Yeah, that's why when I read it, I was about to stop talking. I was like, oh, wait. Discord, for anyone unfamiliar.
That's a major social player inside of gaming.
Like, there are many YouTubers I know that have their own Discord channels for their fan base.
I think 90% of the streamers I follow do.
That have nothing to do with gaming. You can only imagine that gamers, how many of us would be affected if suddenly they came out and were like, Discord, due to legal loopholes, has to shut down temporarily and rework some stuff due to a Tencent ban. The gaming market would like implode. People would be losing their minds over that. So that's all companies that could be affected by this type of ban moving forward. Now we can talk about laws we think would be really cool that wouldn't negatively affect us.
As a parent, I can kind of start that where I think there needs to be, and I know my brother strongly agrees with this, that there's certain aspects to games, especially when it comes to loot boxes. And I'm saying just that term because there's so many games that it can tie into, and how it's very problematic and very dangerous for kids because of how closely it relates to gambling. And I think I'll let you explain it a little bit better, but I think as a parent, I have to bring that up and say, like, that's something that they should be looking at, and they don't.
Yeah, it's funny because I'll talk about what exists right now. There are current laws in the United States that protect minorities' information. So you can't, as a game developer, you cannot harvest information on minors without parental consent. How that pans out is a whole bunch of legal jargon I won't talk about, but those laws exist. So I find it odd that we're willing to protect minors' information, but we haven't gone that extra step yet to protect them from predation, right? So I would much rather know, this is me, just me, but I would much rather someone know that my son happens to be 13 years old than, I don't have a son, this is just an example, than have my 13-year-old son go spend $1,000 because he's not mentally equipped to handle gambling. And just because it's called, and I'm going to go out and say it, right? A Pokemon trading card. They had Pokemon trading card lawsuits, by the way. This is not like new to the gacha industry. In the 90s? Yes. In the 90s, there were lawsuits on baseball trading cards. There were lawsuits against the Pokemon trading card company in America, all sorts of stuff like that. I went down a rabbit hole, as you can tell, in research. So there's a precedence. And if you go outside of America, and this is where I'm going to tie it into things we'd like to see moving forward, the government's clearly making moves to do, according to this, protection of privacy. I want to see protection of minors, period, across the board. So other countries like Belgium, and Belgium's got some of the better examples, so I'm going to use them for a moment. I have a list, but I don't want to look at it right now. There are several other countries in the world that have already instituted regulations and laws against loot box and loot box-like mechanics, including the the biggest name in the industry, the one at large right now, China itself, who produces the most like famous gotcha games,
God, they're so good too.
has laws in their own country for their own citizens against certain predation habits that those games have. Other countries are following suit in the EU. I would love to see similar regulations against loot box or just randomized gambling like mechanics in gaming. And I think now, with all of this talk about the TikTok ban and all this stuff, now's the time to push forward the things that are going to protect the kids if we're going to be talking about protecting nations, sovereignty, and all that kind of stuff. I'm trying not to get political, right? Like, okay, you guys do whatever you're doing, but while you're at it, I'd really like you to protect our kids.
Right.
And I want to say in a balanced way. I think that a lot of the times out of impulse or out of concern, and I'm air quoting that, because I'll bring up the music industry and how strongly at the time people felt about lyrics and things like that, and how it was affecting our youth and corrupting their minds, so on and so forth. I think with this example, it actually does mess with their brains. And it triggers an impulse that, again, if you know anything about marketing, half of marketing is tricking people's brains into impulse to do something.
It's like the
there's
blind
literal
boxes.
courses on it.
You know, the blind boxes that they have now?
Yeah.
What's a blind box?
It's
A blind
essentially
box.
a loot box of a toy.
Right. So
Like a physical version of gotcha.
A physical gotcha. It's like a box, and you have 9 options that you can get in the box.
Of possibilities.
Oh my god! For the
And you
record,
have to
I've been to Japan. For those listening and viewing, I am not unfamiliar with physical gotcha. I'm a little surprised to hear it's becoming more commonplace in America.
Oh, it's not just common. Like
It's
it's
everywhere.
huge. I'm talking
Really?
beauty influencers are buying these blind boxes because they want Labubus for their purses. Like, it's
I'm so out of the loop.
Or what's it called?
Yeah.
The mugs
God.
that everybody's using, the thermals that everybody's using now.
Stanley's.
Yeah. So like the little dangle things, like a key fob. There's things for that.
Oh,
So
wow.
it's very prevalent, and that's why I brought up marketing. And it's, as like my brother said, it's predatory.
Mm-hmm.
And this is specifically looking at marketing in children. Like adults, like I get it. I work in marketing. I understand it. Some of it's a bit, it's a little gray. But it's not like you're going to take somebody's life savings and say like, well, buy my thing. I don't care what happens with your family. Like you try to keep it balanced and fair. But I think when it comes to gaming and this whole thing that's happening, that needs to be the focus. And as far as information gathering, 90% of U.S. companies do it.
Oh, yeah.
And that's just saying it like that's a fact.
It's
That's
almost
not-
unavoidable. We have a website. I have to get information. Like
Analytics.
Yeah, exactly. There are analytics that are built into the hosting service itself. So just as a personal note, I am a web developer by trade. I specifically designed our website, outknightsmedia.com, plug, to not have any unnecessary whatsoever tracking cookies and none from us. So the web server itself may have one, but our website has nothing that is specific to us and nothing that you cannot be forced to have basically anywhere on the web, including Google. So shameless plug there. All right. I think that's enough for today. We went from here's something in the news, how it's impacting us, and how we'd like to see that type of news be a little bit more catered to what we want in the future. And I found out that Discord was partially owned by Tencent. That was
I'm gonna go cry in a corner again.
All right, everyone. Thank you for listening. This has been another episode of Gaming at the Round Table. This is JoJo, Crystal, and myself, Maverick. See you next time.
Bye.